You know that moment when you realize the person you've sacrificed everything for sees you as nothing more than a burden? When the child you raised, loved, and supported through every milestone of their life reduces your entire existence to old junk. Well, that moment came for me on a sunny Tuesday afternoon when I discovered what my daughter really thought of me. And let me tell you, what happened next changed our relationship forever. My name is Margaret, and I'm 68 years old. For the past 3 years since my husband passed away, I've been living in the same house where we raised our 3 children. It's a modest 4-bedroom home in suburban Ohio, filled with decades of memories, family photos, and yes, accumulated belongings that come with a lifetime of living. My youngest daughter, Sarah, had always been my closest child. While my 2 sons moved across the country for their careers, Sarah stayed local, married her college sweetheart, and seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with me. We had weekly dinners, she'd call just to chat, and when she announced she was pregnant with my first grandchild, I was over the moon. Let me paint you a picture of who I was as a mother, because what happened later will make your blood boil if you understand how much I gave to my children. When Sarah was 12, she was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis. The doctors said she might never be able to participate in sports or even walk normally without pain. Did I accept that diagnosis? Absolutely not. I spent 18 months driving her to specialists 3 hours away, twice a week. I researched every treatment, every therapy, every possible solution. I took a second job working nights at a call center so I could afford the experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. I slept 4 hours a night for over a year. I learned to give her injections when she was too scared to let the nurses do it. I held her while she cried from the pain, and I celebrated with her when she made the high school tennis team, something doctors said would never happen. When she was 16 and wanted to go to space camp, I worked overtime for 6 months to afford it. When she got accepted to her dream college but the financial aid wasn't enough, I took out a second mortgage on our house. When she wanted to study abroad in Italy, I sold my wedding ring to help make it happen. I wasn't a perfect mother, but I was a devoted one. Everything I did was for my children's future, their happiness, their success. Fast forward to last year. Sarah, now 34, and her husband Jake announced they were expecting their first child. I was absolutely thrilled. Finally, I was going to be a grandmother. Sarah seemed genuinely excited to share this journey with me. She asked me to come to her ultrasound appointments, included me in conversations about baby names, and even asked for my advice on nursery themes. We went shopping together for baby clothes, and I helped her research the best cribs and strollers. During one of our shopping trips, she mentioned that she and Jake were looking at bigger houses. Their current 2-bedroom condo was perfect for a young couple, but they needed more space for the baby and hopefully more children in the future. "I'm so excited for you to see whatever house we choose, Mom," she said, squeezing my arm. "I want you to be comfortable there too, since you'll probably be babysitting a lot." I smiled, feeling warm and needed. The idea of being an involved grandmother, of having a real purpose again after feeling somewhat lost since my husband's death, filled me with joy. Over the next few months, Sarah and Jake looked at dozens of houses. She'd call me after each viewing, describing the pros and cons, asking what I thought about different neighborhoods, school districts, and layouts. "We found one with a perfect guest room for you, Mom," she'd say. Or, "This one has a great kitchen where we could cook together when you visit." I felt included, valued, important to their future plans. When they finally found the one, Sarah was over the moon. It was a beautiful 5-bedroom colonial in a family-friendly neighborhood with great schools. The price was at the top of their budget, but they felt it was worth it for the space and location. "Mom, you're going to love it," she gushed over the phone. "There's this perfect room that would be ideal for when you visit. It's on the first floor, so you won't have to worry about stairs as you get older. And there's a bathroom right across the hall." The way she said, "as you get older," stung a little, but I pushed that feeling aside. She was being practical, thoughtful even. The closing process took about 6 weeks, during which Sarah and I talked almost daily about the house, decorating plans, and preparations for the baby. She was now 5 months pregnant and glowing with excitement about both the new house and the impending arrival. Moving day was a family affair. My sons couldn't make it. One was in Seattle, the other in Denver, but I was there bright and early with coffee and donuts for the movers. Sarah's in-laws came too, and we all worked together to get them settled. The house was even more beautiful than Sarah had described. Hardwood floors throughout, a gorgeous kitchen with granite countertops, and a lovely bay window in what would become the nursery. I felt proud watching my daughter and son-in-law start this new chapter of their lives. "I can't wait to show you your room, Mom," Sarah said as we took a break from unpacking boxes. "But let's get the main areas sorted first." I understood. Moving is stressful, and with a baby on the way, they needed to prioritize. I spent the day helping them unpack kitchen essentials, hanging pictures, and organizing the nursery items we'd bought together. 2 weeks after they moved in, Sarah invited me over for dinner to see how they'd settled in. I brought a casserole, her favorite tuna noodle dish that I'd been making since she was a child, and a bottle of sparkling cider to celebrate their new home. The house looked wonderful. They'd managed to unpack most of the main living areas, and Sarah had already started decorating the nursery with the soft yellow and green theme we'd chosen together. "This is absolutely beautiful, sweetheart," I told her as we walked through the rooms. "You and Jake have done such a wonderful job making it feel like home." "Thanks, Mom, we love it here." "Oh, and I finally finished setting up your room. Do you want to see it?" My heart warmed. Having a designated space in my daughter's home felt like a sign of how much I meant to their growing family. "I'd love to see it." We walked down a hallway toward the back of the house. Sarah stopped in front of a closed door and turned to me with a smile. "I think you're going to love what we've done with this space," she said, turning the doorknob. The door opened and I stepped inside. It was a nice room, decent size, good natural light, and clearly freshly painted. But it was what was on the door inside the room that made my heart stop. On the inside of the door, there was a label. Not a handwritten sign or even a nice nameplate. A printed label, the kind you'd put on a storage box or filing cabinet. And it read, "Future storage for Mom's old junk." For a moment, I thought it might be some kind of joke. A misplaced label that had somehow ended up on the wrong door. But as I looked around the room more carefully, the reality began to sink in. The room was set up like a storage area. There were plastic storage bins stacked along one wall. Metal shelving units lined another wall. In the corner was a folding table, not a desk, not a dresser, but the kind of table you'd use for sorting through belongings. "Well, what do you think?" Sarah asked brightly. I stared at the label again, reading it slowly. "Future storage for Mom's old junk." "Sarah," I said carefully, "what is this room exactly?" "Oh, this is perfect for when you need to downsize," she said matter-of-factly. "I know you have a lot of stuff in that big house, and when you're ready to move into a smaller place or assisted living, you can store everything here that you can't fit in your new place." The words hit me like a physical blow. Assisted living, old junk, storage. You said this was going to be a guest room for me," I managed to say. Sarah looked confused. "Well, it could be that too, I guess, but Mom, be practical. How often are you really going to sleep over? Maybe once or twice a year. It makes more sense to use the space for storage most of the time. This way, you won't have to pay for one of those expensive storage units." I looked at the label again. Not Mom's belongings or Mom's things or even Margaret's room. Mom's old junk. "You think my things are junk?" I asked quietly. "Oh, Mom, don't be so sensitive. I just mean, old stuff. Things you don't really need anymore but can't bear to throw away. Everyone has junk, it's not personal." But it felt deeply personal. It felt like she was reducing my entire life, my memories, my belongings, my very existence, to junk that needed to be stored away in the back room of her house. I didn't say much for the rest of that visit. I sat through dinner, made polite conversation about the pregnancy, and complimented the house. But inside, I was reeling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that label. Future storage for Mom's old junk. Had I misunderstood? Was I being too sensitive, as Sarah suggested? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was being practical. Maybe she was thinking ahead to help me. Maybe junk was just poor word choice. But then I thought about all the things in my house that she would consider junk. The antique rocking chair where I'd nursed all 3 of my children. The china cabinet that belonged to my mother, filled with dishes that had been at every family holiday for 40 years. The photo albums documenting every milestone of my children's lives. The quilt my grandmother made, which covered Sarah's bed until she went to college. Were these things junk? Were they worthless simply because they were old, simply because they belonged to me? The next day, I called Sarah. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, to assume she hadn't meant to hurt me. "Hi, sweetheart, I wanted to thank you for dinner last night." Of course, Mom. I'm so glad you got to see the house. About that room, I began carefully, the one with the label on the door. Oh, the storage room, what about it? Well, I was wondering if we could talk about that label. Future storage for Mom's old junk, it felt a little. Mom, Sarah interrupted, and I could hear the exasperation in her voice. Please don't make a big deal out of this, it's just a practical solution. You know you're going to have to downsize eventually, and this way you'll have a place for your extra stuff. But calling it junk, what would you prefer I call it? Mom's precious treasures, be realistic, Mom. Half the stuff in your house you haven't looked at in years. Most of it probably should be thrown away, but I know you won't do that, so this is a compromise. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Sarah, those things aren't junk to me. They're my life, my memories, my family's history. There was a pause, then Sarah sighed. Look, Mom, I'm 6 months pregnant, I just moved into a new house and I'm trying to be helpful. I'm sorry if the label hurt your feelings, but I don't have time to worry about semantics right now. The room is there if you need it. Use it or don't use it. She hung up. I sat in my kitchen, holding the phone, and realized that this wasn't about a label or a room. This was about how my daughter saw me. Not as a person with valuable experiences and cherished belongings, but as an aging woman with too much stuff who would eventually become a burden that needed to be managed. I thought about all the times I'd heard her on the phone with friends complaining about having to help elderly parents. My friend Janet's mom is driving her crazy, she'd said once. She refuses to get rid of anything. Their house is like a museum, and Janet knows she's going to have to deal with all that crap when her mom dies. Had she been talking about me too? Was I the crazy old mom with too much crap? Over the next few days, I started noticing other things. Small comments Sarah had made that I'd previously dismissed. Mom, do you really need all those photo albums when everything's digital now? Why do you keep Dad's clothes? It's been 3 years. That china cabinet takes up so much space. When's the last time you actually used those dishes? I thought she was trying to help me declutter. Now I realized she saw my belongings, my life, as a burden she'd eventually have to handle. 3 weeks later, Sarah called to invite me to her baby shower. Her mother-in-law was hosting it at their country club, and Sarah wanted me to help with the planning. I'd love that, I said, genuinely excited. Despite my hurt feelings about the room, I wanted to be involved in celebrating my grandchild. The planning process was actually wonderful. Sarah's mother-in-law, Patricia, was gracious and kind, and she made me feel valued and included. We spent hours choosing decorations, planning games, and coordinating the menu. Margaret, Patricia said during one of our planning sessions, Sarah is so lucky to have such a devoted mother. She tells me all the time how grateful she is for everything you've done for her. I smiled, feeling a bit of the warmth return. Maybe I had been overreacting about the room. The baby shower was beautiful. About 30 women attended, including Sarah's friends, colleagues, and family members. I put together a photo display showing Sarah from birth through her wedding day, and many guests commented on how lovely it was. The gifts were opened, games were played, and everyone was having a wonderful time. I felt proud to be Sarah's mother, surrounded by people celebrating her and my future grandchild. Then came the moment that changed everything. Near the end of the shower, Patricia asked if anyone wanted to share a special memory or wish for Sarah and the baby. Several people spoke, friends sharing funny stories, colleagues offering career advice for working mothers, relatives giving wisdom about parenthood. When it was my turn, I stood up with tears in my eyes. I just want to say how proud I am of Sarah, I began. Watching her grow into the amazing woman she is today has been the greatest joy of my life. I remember when she was diagnosed with arthritis as a child, and everyone told us she'd never play sports. But look at her now, she played tennis in high school, she's accomplished so much in her career, and now she's going to be an incredible mother. I paused, looking at my daughter. I know that becoming a grandmother is going to be just as wonderful as being a mother was. I can't wait to share in this next chapter of our family's story. The room was quiet, and I could see several people wiping their eyes. I felt good about what I'd said, proud of the relationship I'd described. Then Sarah stood up. Thanks, Mom, that's so sweet. She paused, and I could see something shift in her expression. You know, speaking of next chapters, I should probably mention that Mom and I have been talking about her future living situation. I felt my stomach drop. What was she doing? As Mom gets older, Sarah continued, speaking to the room as if I wasn't there, she's going to need to downsize from that big house she's in. It's way too much for her to manage. So Jake and I have set up a storage room in our new house for all her old things. Several women in the room shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't typical baby shower conversation. The thing is, Sarah continued, and I could hear an edge in her voice, Mom has a really hard time letting go of stuff. I mean, she still has every photo album, every piece of furniture, every knickknack she's ever owned. Her house is honestly like a museum. I felt my face burning with embarrassment. Why was she doing this? So we figured this would be a good compromise. She can keep all her old junk, I mean, her belongings, but they'll be safely stored at our house instead of cluttering up some tiny apartment. The room was completely silent now. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes looking between Sarah and me. Patricia looked mortified. Sarah, I said quietly, this isn't really the time or place. Oh, Mom, everyone here understands. Most of us have dealt with aging parents. She turned back to the group. The hard part is getting them to accept reality. Mom keeps talking about staying in her house forever, but that's just not practical. She's 68, she's all alone in this big house, and honestly, it's getting a little concerning. I felt like I couldn't breathe. She was talking about me like I was a child, like I was incompetent, like I was a problem to be solved. And she was doing it in front of 30 people at what was supposed to be a celebration. I think we should probably, Patricia started to say. It's fine, Sarah said with a wave of her hand. I'm just saying it's nice to have family support when you're dealing with these kinds of situations. Mom knows we love her and want what's best for her. She looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Right, Mom? I looked around the room at all these women, some I knew, some I just met, all staring at me with mixtures of pity and discomfort. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days in my daughter's pregnancy, and she'd turned it into a public discussion of my inadequacies. I thought about that label on the door, future storage for Mom's old junk. I thought about how she dismissed my feelings on the phone. I thought about how she just described me to 30 people as an aging woman who couldn't face reality, whose belongings were clutter, whose living situation was concerning. And I realized that this wasn't about a room or a label. This was about respect. This was about how Sarah saw me as a person. And apparently she saw me as a burden, a problem, someone whose feelings didn't matter as long as she could solve the situation of my existence. I stood up slowly. The room was completely quiet. You know what, Sarah? I said, my voice surprisingly steady. You're absolutely right. She looked surprised by my response. I am getting older. I do have a lot of belongings. And I probably will need to make some changes in the future. Sarah smiled, clearly thinking she'd won. But I continued, I just realized something important. The problem isn't my age or my house or my belongings. The problem is that I've been thinking of myself the way you think of me. As someone whose life is winding down, whose best days are behind her, whose main purpose now is to not be too much trouble for her children. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. But that's not who I am. I'm 68 years old, not 98. I'm healthy, I'm independent, I have interests and friends and a life that I've worked hard to build. And most importantly, I have value as a person that isn't dependent on how convenient I am for other people. I picked up my purse. Sarah, I love you and I'm excited about my grandchild. But I'm not going to accept being treated like a burden or a problem to be managed. My belongings aren't junk, my life isn't clutter, and my future isn't something for you to plan without consulting me. I turned to address the room. Ladies, thank you for a lovely shower. Sarah, congratulations on your pregnancy. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your celebration. And I walked out. I drove home in a state that was part shock, part anger, and part something I hadn't felt in a long time. Empowerment. My phone started ringing before I even got home. First Patricia, then several women from the shower, then Sarah herself. I let them all go to voicemail. When I got home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my living room, looking around at what Sarah had called junk and clutter. The photo albums on the bookshelf contained pictures of my children's entire lives. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school plays, graduations, weddings. Were these junk because they weren't digital? The antique secretary desk by the window was where I'd written letters to my children when they went to college, where I'd balanced our household budget for 30 years, where I'd planned family vacations and organized school fundraisers. Was this clutter because it wasn't modern? The quilt draped over my armchair was made by my grandmother's hands, had covered my children when they were sick, had comforted me through my husband's illness and death. Was this worthless because it was old? I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd started seeing my life through Sarah's eyes. I'd started believing that being older meant being less valuable, that having history meant having too much stuff, that needing help sometimes meant being a burden. But that wasn't true. Later that evening, I finally listened to the voicemails. Patricia's message was kind. "Margaret, I am so sorry about what happened today. That was completely inappropriate, and I want you to know that everyone there was uncomfortable with how Sarah spoke to you. Please call me when you're ready to talk." Several other women from the shower had left similar messages, expressing their shock at Sarah's behavior and their support for how I'd handled the situation. But it was Sarah's message that was the most telling. "Mom, I cannot believe you embarrassed me like that in front of all those people. What were you thinking? I was trying to be helpful, trying to plan for your future, and you made me look like some kind of villain. Everyone there probably thinks I'm a terrible daughter now. This was supposed to be my special day, and you ruined it. I'm really hurt and disappointed. I think you owe me an apology." I listened to that message 3 times. She was hurt. She was disappointed. I owed her an apology. Not once did she acknowledge that she'd publicly humiliated me. Not once did she seem to understand that calling my belongings junk and discussing my living situation like I was an incompetent child might have been hurtful. Not once did she consider that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong. I deleted the message. Over the next few days, I did something I probably should have done years ago. I started researching what it actually meant to be 68 years old in today's world. I looked up statistics about life expectancy, health outcomes, and activity levels for people my age. I researched housing options not because I was ready to move, but because I wanted to understand what my real options were, not what Sarah thought they should be. What I discovered was eye-opening. The average life expectancy for a woman my age was 85 to 90 years. That meant I potentially had 17 to 22 years left. That's not a brief epilogue to my life, that's potentially more than 2 decades. Most people my age were living independently well into their 70s and even 80s. Many were working, volunteering, traveling, starting new hobbies, even starting new relationships. I started reading blogs and articles written by women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. These weren't people sitting around waiting to be managed by their children. They were living full, active, purposeful lives. I joined some online forums for people my age and was amazed by the conversations. People were discussing travel plans, career changes, educational pursuits, fitness goals, dating advice, and yes, housing decisions, but decisions they were making for themselves, not having made for them. I realized that I'd been accepting Sarah's narrative about my life without questioning it. She'd convinced me that being 68 meant being on the verge of incompetence, that living alone was dangerous, that having belongings was hoarding, that needing help was the same as being helpless. But none of that was true. As I researched and reflected, I started to get angry, not just at Sarah, but at myself. How had I let someone else, even my own daughter, define my worth and my future? I thought about my husband, who had lived with such dignity even through his illness. He never let anyone treat him like he was less than who he was. He never apologized for taking up space in the world. I thought about my own mother, who had lived independently until she was 84 and only moved to assisted living after a stroke. Even then, she'd made the decision herself on her own terms. I thought about all the women I knew who had raised children, built careers, maintained homes, supported their families through decades of challenges, only to be treated like burdens when they reached a certain age. And I decided that wasn't going to be my story. I was going to show Sarah and, frankly, myself exactly what a 68-year-old woman was capable of. I started with my house. Not because I thought it needed to be decluttered to meet Sarah's standards, but because I wanted to make it exactly what I wanted it to be. I went through every room, not asking what would Sarah think of this, but does this bring me joy? Does this serve a purpose in my life? Does this reflect who I am and who I want to be? Some things I did decide to donate, not because they were junk, but because they no longer fit my life. Old business clothes from a career I'd left behind, books I'd read and wouldn't read again, kitchen gadgets I'd never used, but I kept the things that mattered, the photo albums because I liked looking through them, the antique furniture because it was beautiful and well-made, the collections of things that told the story of my life and my family. I also made improvements. I hired a handyman to update some fixtures, painted the guest room a color I loved, and bought new bedding that felt luxurious and comfortable. I landscaped the front yard, not because it needed to appeal to anyone else, but because I wanted to see beautiful flowers when I looked out my window. Most importantly, I stopped apologizing for having things, for taking up space, for existing in a house that Sarah thought was too big for me. Next, I focused on building the life I wanted, not the life that would be most convenient for my children. I joined a book club at the local library. I started taking a watercolor painting class at the community center. I signed up for a fitness class designed for seniors not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to stay strong and healthy. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with over the years. I made new friends through my activities. I started volunteering at a local literacy program, helping adults learn to read. Within a month, my calendar was fuller than it had been in years. I was busier, happier, and more engaged with life than I'd been since my husband died. Most importantly, I was living for myself, not just existing as someone's mother or potential burden. One thing that had always worried me about aging was financial security. I'd heard too many stories about older women running out of money, becoming dependent on their children, having to accept living situations they didn't want because they couldn't afford alternatives. I made an appointment with a financial advisor to review my situation honestly. What I discovered was that I was in much better shape than I'd realized. My house was paid off and worth considerably more than when we'd bought it. I had my husband's life insurance money, which I'd barely touched. I had retirement savings and Social Security. The advisor helped me understand that not only could I afford to stay in my house as long as I wanted, but I had options. I could afford to hire help if I needed it. I could afford to modify my house if accessibility became an issue. I could even afford to move to a nice retirement community if I chose to, not because I had to. This knowledge was powerful. It meant that any decisions about my future would be my decisions, not decisions forced on me by financial constraints or by children who thought they knew what was best for me. Meanwhile, Sarah and I weren't speaking. After her initial voicemail, she'd tried calling a few more times, but I hadn't answered. She'd sent a few text messages, but they all had the same tone. She was the injured party, I had behaved inappropriately, and I owed her an apology. Part of me missed her. Part of me worried about damaging our relationship permanently. Part of me wanted to just apologize and go back to the way things were. But every time I felt that urge, I remembered the label on that door. Future storage for Mom's old junk. I remembered how she'd spoken about me at the baby shower. I remembered how she dismissed my feelings when I tried to talk to her about it. And I realized that the way things were wasn't actually that good. It was just familiar. For years, I'd been accepting less respect, less consideration, less basic human dignity than I deserved, all in the name of maintaining family harmony. I'd been grateful for whatever scraps of attention and inclusion Sarah offered, even when those scraps came with conditions and criticism. I deserved better than that. 6 weeks after the baby shower incident, I got a text from Sarah. "Mom, I wanted to let you know that I'm having some complications with the pregnancy. The doctor says the baby and I are fine, but I'm on bed rest for the next few weeks. I thought you should know." Every maternal instinct in my body screamed at me to call her immediately, to rush over with soup and comfort, to put aside everything that had happened and just be there for my daughter. But I'd learned something important over the past month and a half. Being a loving mother didn't mean accepting disrespectful treatment. Being family didn't mean sacrificing my own dignity. I texted back. "I'm sorry to hear about the complications. I hope you and the baby continue to be healthy. Please let me know if there's anything specific you need help with." It was warm but not desperate, caring but not self-sacrificing. It acknowledged her situation without pretending that our conflict didn't exist. She didn't respond. Meanwhile, the fallout from the baby shower continued. Patricia called me several times and we developed an unexpected friendship. She was horrified by how Sarah had spoken to me and shared that she'd actually had words with Sarah after I left. "I told her that what she did was unacceptable," Patricia said during one of our coffee dates. "I said that if she was my daughter, I'd be ashamed of her behavior. The way she spoke about you to you in front of all those people, it was just awful." Several other women from the shower reached out as well. Some shared their own stories about difficult relationships with adult children, Others just wanted to express their support for how I'd handled the situation. "You handled that with such grace," one woman told me. "I don't think I could have been so composed if my daughter had embarrassed me like that." Another said, "Good for you for standing up for yourself. Too many of us just take it when our kids treat us poorly because we're afraid of losing them." These conversations were validating, but also eye-opening. I realized that what had happened to me wasn't unique. Many women my age were struggling with adult children who saw them as burdens rather than people, who made decisions about their lives without consulting them, who treated them with less respect than they'd show to strangers. And many of these women were accepting this treatment because they were afraid that setting boundaries would damage their relationships with their children. But I was starting to understand that a relationship built on one person accepting disrespect isn't really a relationship worth preserving. 2 months later, I got a text at 3 a.m. "Baby is here. Emma Rose, 7 pounds 3 oz. Everyone is healthy." My heart leaped. My first grandchild was here. I immediately wanted to call to congratulate them, to ask when I could visit, to find out if they needed anything. But it was 3 a.m., and more importantly, I needed to think about how I wanted to handle this. I waited until a reasonable hour and then called. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Hi, Mom. Congratulations, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Tired but good. She's perfect, Mom, absolutely perfect." For a moment, it was like nothing had happened between us. We were just a mother and daughter sharing the joy of a new baby. "I'd love to meet her," I said carefully. There was a pause. "Of course, when would you like to come by?" "Whenever is convenient for you. I know you must be exhausted." "How about tomorrow afternoon?" "Around 2. "That sounds perfect." We hung up and I realized I was crying. Happy tears, nervous tears, hopeful tears. The next day, I drove to Sarah's house with a beautiful bouquet of flowers and a gift bag containing a soft pink blanket I'd knitted during the weeks we weren't speaking. Sarah answered the door looking tired but radiant. "Hi, Mom, come in." The house looked different somehow. More lived in, more like a home. There were baby items everywhere, a bouncy seat in the living room, a bassinet by the couch, receiving blankets draped over chairs. "Where is she?" I asked. "She's sleeping, but she should wake up soon. She's been eating every 2 hours." We sat in the living room, and for a few minutes the conversation was carefully neutral. How was the delivery? How was Jake handling fatherhood? Were they getting any sleep? Then Emma started crying from upstairs. "Perfect timing," Sarah said with a smile. "Would you like to hold her while I get her bottle ready?" My heart melted as Sarah placed my granddaughter in my arms. Emma was absolutely beautiful, tiny and perfect, with Sarah's nose and what looked like it might be my late husband's chin. "Hello, sweet girl," I whispered. "I'm your grandma, Margaret." As I held Emma, something shifted in the room. Sarah sat down across from me and I could see tears in her eyes. "Mom," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology." I looked up from Emma's face, surprised. What I did at the baby shower, what I said, it was wrong, really wrong. In the room, the label, she took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about it a lot, especially these past few weeks while I was on bed rest." I waited, holding Emma close. "Patricia really let me have it after you left that day. She told me I should be ashamed of myself, and she was right." And then Jake's grandmother came to visit last week, and she's 89 and still living in her own house, still driving, still volunteering at the hospital. She brought photo albums and told us stories about Jake's grandfather, and I realized. Sarah wiped her eyes. "I realized that I was treating you like you were already dead. Like your life was over and all that was left was managing the inconvenience of your existence. And that's not who you are at all." Emma had fallen back asleep in my arms, and Sarah and I sat in the quiet of her living room having the most honest conversation we'd had in years. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing you the way we lost Dad. Scared of you getting sick or hurt and me not being able to help. Scared of making the wrong decisions if something happened to you." She leaned forward. "But instead of talking to you about those fears, I just started taking over, making decisions for you, treating you like you couldn't make them yourself." "The room," I said. "The label." "The room was supposed to be for you, Mom. It really was. But I guess somewhere in my head I'd already decided that you were going to need to be managed. That you wouldn't be able to make good decisions about your own life. And my things became junk instead of belongings." Sarah nodded, tears flowing freely now. "Your things are your life, Mom, your history, your memories, your choices. I had no right to call them junk. I had no right to make plans for your future without asking you what you wanted. It felt good to hear her say these things, but I also knew that understanding why something happened doesn't automatically fix the hurt it caused. Sarah, I said carefully, I appreciate your apology, I really do, but I need you to understand something. She nodded. These past few months since I walked out of that baby shower, I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned that I don't have to accept being treated poorly just to maintain family relationships. I've learned that I have more options, more strength, more life ahead of me than I thought. I looked down at Emma. I want to be part of this little girl's life. I want to be the grandmother she deserves. But I can't go back to being the version of myself that accepted disrespect because it was easier than standing up for myself. What does that mean? Sarah asked. It means that our relationship has to be different going forward. It has to be based on mutual respect. You can't make decisions about my life without consulting me. You can't dismiss my feelings when I tell you something has hurt me. And you can't treat me like a burden or a problem to be solved. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. You're right, she said finally. You're absolutely right, and I promise you, Mom, I will do better. After we talked for about an hour, Sarah asked if I wanted to see Emma's nursery. As we walked down the hallway, I noticed that the door to the storage room was open. I glanced inside and stopped. The room had been completely transformed. Gone were the plastic storage bins and metal shelving. Instead, there was a comfortable chair by the window, a small dresser, and a twin bed with a beautiful quilt, not the one from my house, but a new one in soft blues and greens. What happened to the storage room? I asked. Sarah looked embarrassed. I changed it back. After Patricia yelled at me after I really thought about what I'd done, I realized how awful it was. This is your room, Mom. Your actual room for when you want to stay over. She walked over to the door and showed me that the label was gone. In its place was a simple wooden sign that read Margaret's room. I had that made at the craft store, she said. I wanted it to be nice. I walked into the room and sat in the chair by the window. It was comfortable with a good view of Sarah's backyard. The morning light came in beautifully. This is lovely, I said, and I meant it. I was hoping maybe you'd want to stay over sometimes. Not because you have to, not because I think you can't take care of yourself, but because I'd like you to, because Emma should know her grandmother. Because I miss you. Over the next few months, Sarah and I worked to build a new kind of relationship. It wasn't always easy, old patterns are hard to break, and we both had to catch ourselves sometimes. There were moments when Sarah would start to make assumptions about what I could or couldn't do, and I'd have to remind her that I was capable of making my own decisions. There were moments when I had to resist the urge to just go along with whatever she wanted to avoid conflict. But gradually, we found our footing. I did start staying over occasionally, not because I needed supervision, but because I enjoyed spending time with Emma and because Sarah genuinely wanted me there. The room was comfortable, and more importantly, it felt like it was truly mine. Sarah consulted me about decisions that affected me instead of making them unilaterally. When she was planning Emma's baptism, she asked where I'd like to have the family dinner afterward instead of just announcing where it would be. When she was thinking about childcare options, she asked if I'd be interested in babysitting regularly instead of just assuming I would be available. Most importantly, she stopped talking about my future as if it was something that needed to be managed and started asking me about my plans as if I was a person capable of making them. 6 months after Emma was born, something happened that I never could have predicted. Patricia called me one morning with an unexpected proposition. She and her husband were planning to sell their large family home and move into a luxury retirement community that was being built across town. But they'd learned that the community was looking for an activities director, someone to plan social events, coordinate classes, and help build a sense of community among the residents. Margaret, she said, I immediately thought of you. You're organized, you're social, you have great ideas, and you understand what people our age are looking for. Plus, if you were interested, you could buy one of the condos in the community. They're beautiful 2 bedrooms, full kitchens, private patios. You'd have your independence but also built-in social opportunities. A job at 68, moving to a retirement community. 6 months earlier, the old me would have immediately said no. I would have worried about what Sarah would think, whether I was too old, whether it was too big a change. But the new me was intrigued. I asked Patricia to send me information about both the job and the housing options. What I saw impressed me. This wasn't the stereotypical old folks' home that I'd been imagining when Sarah talked about my future. It was a vibrant community designed for active adults with fitness facilities, art studios, walking trails, and a calendar packed with activities. The job description was exciting too. They wanted someone to create programming that would engage residents intellectually, socially, and creatively. They wanted someone who understood that retirement didn't mean the end of growth and learning. I decided to apply. The interview process was rigorous, which I appreciated. They weren't looking for just anyone, they wanted someone with vision, experience, and the energy to build something special. I prepared for the interview the same way I would have prepared for any job interview in my career. I researched the company, developed ideas for programming, and thought carefully about how my life experiences had prepared me for this role. The interview went beautifully. I found myself energized by the conversation, excited about the possibilities, confident in my abilities in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Mrs. Richardson," the director said at the end of our conversation, "I have to tell you, we've interviewed a lot of candidates for this position. Most of them seem to think that programming for seniors means bingo and bus trips to the casino. You understand that our residents are looking for something more substantial. These are people who had careers, raised families, built businesses, traveled the world," I replied. "They want to continue growing and learning and contributing. They want to be challenged, not just entertained." "Exactly, when can you start?" I got the job. More than that, I was excited about the job. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to something that was entirely mine, entirely about what I wanted to do with my life. But I was nervous about telling Sarah. I decided to tell her in person during one of my regular visits to see Emma. I brought lunch from her favorite deli and we sat in her kitchen while Emma napped. "I have some news," I said. Oh, Sarah looked curious but not concerned. "I got a job." Sarah's eyes widened. "A job, Mom? What kind of job?" I explained about the retirement community, the activities director position, and the housing options. As I talked, I watched Sarah's face go through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been concern. "So you're moving?" she asked when I finished. "I'm thinking about it. The job starts in 2 months, and the condo I'm looking at would be available around the same time." "But Mom," Sarah started, then stopped herself. I could see her wrestling with her instinct to object, to point out all the reasons why this might not be a good idea. "But what?" I asked gently. "Nothing, I'm surprised. I didn't know you were looking for a job or thinking about moving." "I wasn't until this opportunity came up. But Sarah, I'm excited about it, really excited. I feel like I'm starting a new chapter instead of just waiting for the last one to end." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she smiled, a real smile, not a forced one. "You know what, Mom, good for you, I mean that. This sounds like an incredible opportunity." "Really? Really? I can tell how excited you are just by looking at you. You look younger, happier, and honestly, it sounds perfect for you." I did take the job and buy the condo. The transition was smoother than I'd expected, partly because I'd spent months organizing my belongings and partly because I was moving toward something I wanted rather than away from something I was being forced to leave. I kept many of my treasured possessions: the photo albums, the antique furniture that fit in my new space, the quilt my grandmother made. But I also donated quite a bit, not because it was junk, but because I was choosing to simplify my life on my own terms. Sarah helped with the move, and I could see that she was genuinely happy for me. She admired my new condo, asked thoughtful questions about my job responsibilities, and helped me hang pictures in ways that made the space feel like home. "Mom," she said as we took a break from unpacking, "I owe you another apology." "For what?" "For assuming that your only options were staying in your old house until you couldn't manage anymore or moving into some kind of assisted living facility. I never imagined that you might choose something like this, something that was actually better than what you had before." She looked around my bright, modern condo with its view of gardens and walking trails. "This is amazing. You're going to love it here." I threw myself into my work with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in decades. The retirement community was full of fascinating people with incredible life stories and diverse interests. I organized book clubs and art classes, coordinated guest speakers and educational seminars, planned social events and volunteer opportunities. I started a monthly second act series where residents shared stories about things they'd accomplished or discovered after age 50. The job was challenging in the best possible way. I was using skills I'd developed over a lifetime, but I was also learning new things: how to use social media to promote events, how to coordinate with outside organizations, how to manage budgets and timelines for multiple programs simultaneously. Most importantly, I was working with people who saw me as capable and valuable, who appreciated my ideas and energy, who treated me as a professional colleague rather than someone who needed to be managed. 6 months into my new job, something wonderful happened. The retirement community won an award from the state's Department of Aging for Excellence in Senior Programming. The award specifically cited the innovative and engaging activities that had been developed since I'd started. The award ceremony was held at the state capitol, and I was invited to accept the award on behalf of the community. Sarah and Jake came to the ceremony, bringing Emma, who was now walking and starting to say words. As I stood at the podium accepting the award, I looked out at the audience and saw Sarah in the front row, tears streaming down her face, clapping enthusiastically. After the ceremony, she came up to me and hugged me tightly. "Mom, I am so proud of you, so incredibly proud." "Thank you, sweetheart. I need to tell you something," she said. A year ago, if someone had told me that my 68-year-old mother would be winning awards for her innovative work, I wouldn't have believed it. I had such a limited view of what your life could be. She pulled back to look at me. "You've taught me something important about aging, about potential, about never giving up on yourself. And you've taught Emma something important too, even though she's too young to understand it yet." "What's that?" "That women can be strong and independent and valuable at any age. That getting older doesn't mean getting smaller. That sometimes the most exciting chapters of your life haven't even started yet." It's been 2 years since I found that label on Sarah's door. 2 years since I walked out of that baby shower. 2 years since I decided to stop accepting less respect than I deserved. Sarah and I have a better relationship now than we've had in years, maybe ever. It's based on mutual respect rather than obligation, on genuine interest in each other's lives rather than assumptions about what those lives should look like. She asks my advice about parenting decisions, career choices, and life challenges. Not because she has to, but because she values my perspective. I share what I've learned about starting over, about building confidence, about creating the life you want regardless of your age. Emma, now 2.5, loves visiting my condo. She has her own little bed in my guest room, and she's fascinated by the gardens and the ducks in the pond. She's learning that her grandmother isn't just someone's mother, she's a whole person with her own interests, achievements, and adventures. Most importantly, Sarah has learned to see me as a complete person rather than just as her aging mother who needs to be managed. She understands that I have decades of life ahead of me, that I'm capable of making my own decisions, that my experiences and belongings have value beyond their convenience or inconvenience to her. Looking back on this whole experience, I've learned several important lessons that I think other people in similar situations might benefit from. First, age doesn't define your worth or capability. At 68, I was still capable of learning new skills, taking on new challenges, and making positive changes in my life. The narrative that life is essentially over at retirement age is not only false, it's harmful. Second, respect is not negotiable. Family relationships don't give people the right to treat you poorly. Love doesn't mean accepting disrespect to keep the peace. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a relationship is to insist on better treatment. Third, you have more power than you think. Even when it feels like your options are limited, even when other people are trying to make decisions for you, you still have choices. You can still advocate for yourself, set boundaries, and pursue the life you want. Fourth, it's never too late to reinvent yourself. I spent 3 years after my husband's death feeling like my best days were behind me. But some of my most fulfilling and exciting experiences have happened in the past 2 years, after I turned 68. Fifth, your belongings are not junk just because they're old. The things you've collected over a lifetime represent your history, your relationships, your experiences. They have value because you have value, regardless of what anyone else thinks about them. The woman I am today is fundamentally different from the woman who found that label on Sarah's door 2 years ago. I'm more confident, more independent, more aware of my own worth. I'm living a life that feels authentic and purposeful rather than just getting by until someone else decides what should happen to me. I'm not angry at Sarah anymore. I understand that she was operating from fear and love, even if she expressed it poorly. I also understand that many adult children struggle with how to help aging parents without taking over their lives entirely. But I'm grateful that I found the strength to stand up for myself when it mattered. I'm grateful that I didn't just accept the narrative that my life was winding down and my main job was to not be too much trouble. I'm grateful that I discovered I still had the power to write my own story. Today, Emma calls my condo Grandma's house, and it truly feels like home. Sarah visits regularly not to check up on me but because she enjoys spending time with me. We've planned a trip together next summer, just the two of us, to visit Italy, something I've always wanted to do. My work at the retirement community continues to be fulfilling and challenging. I'm currently developing partnerships with the local university to offer continuing education classes for our residents. I'm also writing a book about reimagining retirement, based on my experiences and the stories of the incredible people I work with. Most importantly, I wake up each morning excited about the day ahead rather than just grateful to have made it through another night. I have plans, goals, dreams, and the confidence to pursue them. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself in the woman I used to be, if you're accepting less respect than you deserve because you're afraid of losing relationships, if you're letting other people define your worth and your future, if you're treating your own life like it's less important than everyone else's convenience, I want you to know something. You have more power than you think you do. You have more options than anyone is telling you. You have more life ahead of you than anyone wants to acknowledge. You don't have to accept being treated like a burden. You don't have to let other people make decisions about your life without consulting you. You don't have to apologize for taking up space in the world. Your belongings are not junk. Your experiences are not irrelevant. Your future is not something for other people to plan for you. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to demand better treatment. It's never too late to write a new chapter of your own story. 2 years ago, I found a label on a door that reduced my entire existence to mom's old junk. Today, I have a nameplate on my office door that reads Margaret Richardson, Activities Director. 2 years ago, my daughter was planning my future without consulting me. Today, she asks my advice about her own life decisions. 2 years ago, I thought my best days were behind me. Today, I know that some of my best days are still ahead. The difference wasn't my age, my health, or my circumstances. The difference was my decision to stop accepting less than I deserved and to start demanding the respect and dignity that every person has a right to expect. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to insist on being seen as a whole person rather than just someone's burden. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, on your own terms, with your head held high. That label on Sarah's door was meant to put me in my place, to reduce me to junk that needed to be stored away. Instead, it became the catalyst for me to reclaim my place in the world. And that, I think, is a pretty good ending to this part of my story.